Katayoun Chamany, who is actually my advisor here at Eugene Lang, as I'm an alumni of the Interdisciplinary Science Department. And so she's going to come up and introduce our panel tonight. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I just wanted to welcome everyone and say thank you so much for staying this evening. We've had a weekend of activities and I wanted to first extend a great thank you to Imagine Science Films, our partner for many years, and also to the Department of Media and Cultural Studies, which is co-sponsoring this particular evening's performance, as well as our Dean at Eugene Lang College, who has been consistently supportive of our outreach both in informal and formal education, and her excellent staff, in particular Jen Regal and Karen Noyes, all the students and all the volunteers. So I wanted to first say thank you, and I also want to thank all of you for staying. One of the things that we've done as co-sponsors is to follow the mission of Imagine Science, in that we really feel that there should be no boundaries between art and science. And this is really part of the philosophy of the new school, and specifically Eugene Lang College, that we follow John Dewey's philosophy of learning through doing. So one of my colleagues in the arts says that the sciences and the arts are both perceptual practices that count on creativity, count on imagination, and I feel like these films do just that. So tonight our panel sort of exemplifies that as far as I'm concerned. We have Orit Halpern. Orit, could you please sit to the right of the table? Orit Halpern is an assistant professor in the Department of History here at Eugene Lang College. She is also an affiliate faculty in the Design Studies at Parsons. And Orit, as far as I'm concerned, is sort of a Renaissance woman that traverses many different disciplines. So she has a background in science technology studies. She also herself is an artist. Her most recent book actually looks at big data and the ways in which society's perception might be influenced by the representation of data. And she is also very invested in the application of scientific knowledge and cultural knowledge in terms of design. Our second panelist is Oliver Medvedik, and Oliver is an interesting character because he sort of moves between the informal and the formal. He is an assistant professor of molecular and cell biology at Cooper Union and bioengineering. He also is on the faculty at the School of Visual Arts, and he is a co-founder and scientific director of the do-it-yourself community nonprofit called GenSpace, and I want to just put in a plug for GenSpace. They have a number of activities always going on to involve the public in art science learning and projects. There's a particularly nice series next week, so please take a look at the GenSpace website. So Oliver and Orit are both going to be commenting a little bit on their insight on the film, and then we're going to open it up to the audience for questions and dialogue. We hope that this will be more of a conversation, so we would like to keep this very informal. One of the things I wanted to do was to pose the question of whether, and I'm thinking if I can get the PowerPoint up, but I don't know how, Meredith. Do I need to hit the mouse? Got it. I think I got it. Was to pose the question of whether Creeping Garden could be considered a film that's called an educational film. So this genre of film came out in the turn of the century, in the 1900s. And probably one of the most well-known scientists, Thomas Edison, was sort of recruited in this advent of educational film. So Thomas Edison, partly because of his relationship with George Eastman from Kodak and his contributions to photography, and his commitment to social justice, became involved in a series of films that were made between 1904 and 1914 that were really designed to give society a different view on tuberculosis. So you see the Christmas seals here, which was one of the fundraising efforts to raise money for these films, as well as promote tuberculosis awareness. And really what Thomas Edison's role was in this was to first craft these films, but also to use a very humanistic narrative to demonstrate the ways in which there's no boundary between bacteria and human, but that there are also no boundaries between different groups of people. And so the narratives that you see in this series of 6 films indicate that tuberculosis could affect anyone, and that it's not a result of just poverty or immigration or committing a moral sin. This was just around the time when the notion of germ theory was happening, so the notion that tuberculosis was caused by a bacterium was a very invisible concept. So the effort here was to really make something invisible visible, but also to break down sort of cultural stigma around tuberculosis. And so I was thinking about Keeping Garden as sort of another example of these directors sort of trying to choose an organism which has usually been thought of as creepy and grotesque, and giving it sort of a different view for society, or representing it through art and through scientific endeavors in a new way. And so I think of this as an educational film, but I was wondering if Orit and Oliver wanted to speak to whether they see it as part of that genre, and then also to comment on what they took out of the film. So should we start with Oliver, perhaps?
Hi. Oh, it is on. Okay, good. I'm not really too familiar with very many movie genres, so it certainly struck me as an educational film that it got me interested more in slime mold. But what really stuck out for me is the fact that this organism, which is really hard to classify, it's a protozoan, attracted so many people from so many disparate disciplines coming together and working with this organism in many different ways, and allowing so much cross-collaboration to occur, which is something that I do a lot on the side. So when I say on the side, like half of what I do, I work on projects that involve people from many different disciplines that come together, not just at GenSpace, but also at Cooper Union. People working with biology, people working with computers, people working with music, and basically bringing all these things together and seeing what kind of interesting things happen. So it was really interesting for me to see all these different people working with this, like this one organism, acting as a nucleus for all these different people, and all these people coming together in ways that they normally wouldn't be able to come together otherwise. So that really struck me as really powerful, and just also this element that was raised in the film of amateur science. And I found it intriguing that it seemed to be more popular in the early 20th century, at least the film made out to be, and then it somehow waned after World War I. That would be interesting in of itself historically to see what that phenomenon happened, but maybe there's a re-emergence of this happening. So I do think that, having, films like this and having these types of interactions might, see another blossoming of this type of amateur science where people come together just for the love of creating new things and exploring new knowledge.
Great. Well, I too, if I were to see this as an educational film, I guess it would mean rethinking what education is itself, in the sense of, for a long time as a historian of media and of science, we think about the way media make certain ways of seeing possible, certain ways of being in the world. So there's this adage, right? The cinema renders life larger than it is, and in some sense allows us to see certain forms of life, right, that we hadn't seen before, through this temporal magnification, this changing of time. And of course here, as Oliver just mentioned, there's sort of this intriguing question about what forms of media life makes possible, and what happens when life and media are becoming one and the same thing. So for me, as a historian, I'm a historian of computing and cybernetics too. Of course, I'm really interested at the transformation of our relationship between mechanism and organism, or between vitalism, between what is vital and what is computational. And it seems to me that something was elucidated in the slime mold, which is this kind of radical transformation of how we think about thinking itself, and that's going to become a media question as well. So this was really grasped me. It was sort of that since the 16th century with Descartes, we've been thinking, I think therefore I am, and this has been sort of a grounding in Western societies for separation from the body, from other animals, for different types of organisms, and for a way of seeing the world comprised of all those boxes. So really fascinated by the relationship between all those neat little boxes, and then the kind of vibrancy of the actual organism as rendered through media. And it seems that perhaps that's being transformed. Maybe we're going back to, I don't know, in the medieval ages they had bestiaries, and no one could tell what was alive and what was dead. And rocks would glow and they'd be alive, and barnacled geese would move from being barnacles to being geese. And anyway, there's kind of ontological confusion. And I'm kind of interested in sort of what's happening now, and then what sort of society would imagine itself as slime mold, or begin to imagine computing in these new ways and what that's going to come in and how that changes their relationships to each other, to machines, to the environment. So that's what I thought.
Great. Those are some really great initial thoughts. One of the things I noticed in the narrative is that you see the different characters, as Oliver said, sort of using different terminology. And one of the things that jumped out at me was this notion of intelligence and different kinds of thinking. But then others said, no, I don't want to use the word intelligence. I think I want to use the word behavior. And then others said, no, I don't think I want to use that either. I think I want to look at this as a mechanistic response to environmental stimuli, and challenging our own assumptions about a unicellular organism having this kind of complexity. And so I'm curious to know if you were asked whether the slime mold is intelligent or seeking interesting behaviors, or is just a mechanistic machine, if you will, responding to different kinds of stimuli, whether they're man-made or whether they're organic. What would be your choice of language?
Well, I've been actually, it's interesting to raise that, because I've been thinking about that for the past couple of months about what constitutes behavior. And I just informally was looking up some papers, and I don't know if we'll have a moment to just quickly look at a clip. Sure, if you don't mind. But just while you do that, when people do behavioral studies, you typically you imagine something can exhibit a behavior because it has neurons and has a neural network, and so that's how memories are formed, right? And if you exhibit conditional behavior, meaning you have a Pavlovian response, right? You ring a bell, the dog salivates, right? You bring a bowl of food, you ring a bell, you don't bring a bowl of food, the dog still salivates. So there's a connection was established. Can this happen? How low can you get as far as establishing a behavior? And it's interesting that, people have been studying cells to figure out, try to ask the question, is this type of conditioned response, can it happen at the cellular level? And if so, is there a certain biochemical mechanism where you have this sort of memory response? Without really having any evidence to present to you, I think, my hypothesis would be yes, probably. You certainly do see cells, unicellular cells, tracking bacteria, like for phagocytosis, white blood cells. They're able to integrate signals that are within a very short distance, from the front of the cell, which is a few, less than 100 microns away to the back of the cell. So they're able to integrate this trail, this chemical trail, and follow things around. So there is some sort of process taking place that's pretty advanced and pretty complex. Whether or not you can actually train something at the cell level and respond in a classical kind of behavioral conditioning sense, I'm not sure. That would be pretty cool to see if that can happen. And this slime mold responds chemically, via chemotaxis. And we've been playing around with some things with the paramecium, which also undergoes taxis, but this is called galvanotaxis. So this is with another GenSpace member, Keith Camino, who's not here, and he designed some of the cool soundtracks too. But we've been looking at paramecium and how they may respond to electrical stimuli, and whether or not we can spur more of this interdisciplinary interaction to take place with people in the form of not a movie, but a video game.
Repeatable, and we can compare one result to the next, and it's not based on human factors in terms of the test element.
My name is Keith Camino. My background is in computer science and mathematics. I'm a molecular biologist and co-founder of GenSpace. We decided to open up a laboratory here to bring DIY bio to the public. Recently, I've been working on a number of projects here, and one of the latest projects is the gaming system.
Out in the field, just pulling out your crystal card, looking for weak layers, trying to find a weak layer. It's really important. Sometimes the weak layers can be hard to find, but once you see those facets,
Sorry about that.
My name is Keith Camino. My background is in computer science and mathematics. I'm a molecular biologist, co-founder of GenSpace. We decided to open up a laboratory here to bring DIY bio to the public. Recently, I've been working on a number of projects here, and one of the latest projects is the gaming system. that enables you to control microbes using electrical fields.
The project is a joystick that controls the movement of paramecium, and then an iPhone connected to a microscope that picks up the motion of the paramecium and uses that to play a game like Pac-Man. In the current Pac-Man game, what you're doing right now when you're controlling paramecium is you're controlling their motions, which you see
So
on the
those
game
are
screen.
active living
And they
organisms
swim
on that
through
iPhone. They're just amplified by 400 times. So you're this tracking software that you developed that allows you to see them.
Paramecium are very easy to cultivate. They're harmless. They live everywhere. They live in pond water. They come in different sizes, but they're quite small, much thinner than your hair. So the blobs that you see are approximately 400 times magnified. The reason we're using this microbe specifically in this game system, it's very responsive to electrical fields. It seems like the ideal organism to start off with.
In addition to just adding kind of an element of randomness, it's more interesting to use a real organism in a game like this, how we can cooperate with other organisms to achieve not just entertainment, but interesting art projects, interesting development, just to get people thinking about, oh wow, we can work with other organisms.
Here we have several things coming together. So you've got the biology, you've got the circuitry, you've got the programming, and everything is integrated. It allows many different types of people to play together that I think normally wouldn't.
I really like seeing when a child is playing the game and he sweeps the screen and gets out and has the same smile on his face that I had when I was playing, Atari and Nintendo back in the day. And it really reinforces the idea that this is something that can get kids interested in science and still be entertaining.
It's pretty deep.
So yeah, I guess going back to the question, I do think they're fairly smart for what they are.
Well, for me, that's a big question. I think we're actually in a moment where we're looking at a massive redefinition of intelligence that I think in many ways is transforming built environments, the way we deal with actually and administer and manage human life. So, I mean, I work on things like smart cities, ubiquitous computing, enterprise management systems, automated port facilities, these kind of things, which you wouldn't think have any relationship whatsoever to this. But actually, if you think about it for a second, what is smart in a sensor-filled environment? It obviously means that we've rethought the idea of intelligence to be the networking of a lot of agents together. So if you work on things like the Tokyo subway system, which I do, it is actually a decentralized control system. It was inspired by ideas in ecology, and basically each station goes online, talks to the stations next to it, and the whole thing just goes online basically autonomously, and it's kind of outside of centralized control. So this sort of thinking is emerging. Whether or not that's what intelligence really is, I don't know, but we are currently, so this comes back to this question of what the relationship is between media and how we're envisioning ourselves and how we're envisioning other people. We're currently at a moment in history where we're beginning to think of intelligence as behavioral. I trace that back to time in World War II, actually, when people started noticing, for example, that airplane pilots under stress act repeatedly and therefore can be modeled like machines. And that this is kind of a start of a thing called cybernetics, which also led to the idea of neural nets, where people started thinking, well, if a neuron shoots on and off, maybe it's equivalent to a logic gate. So for me, I think it's really interesting that we as a society view this. I don't know if it's necessarily true, but certainly that imaginary. So I'm just as interested in the reality of what intelligence is as how we're imagining it. And that's where I guess we can ask about the relationship between art and science, because how we're depicting and how we're imagining our relationships is also feeding back, right, into how we're producing technology. So that's my thinking about this.
That's great. I mean, I think all of those people were sort of grappling with the same notion, right? So where are we? Is something half us, half machine, half design, half engineering? And I think that the other thing that I found interesting about a lot of the characters that these two directors chose to highlight is that each of them had a very different medium of representation. So we saw music that was interactive between the physarium and the pianist, or the scientist pianist artist. We also saw Heather Barnett sort of doing this performative educational art experience. And then we saw Andy Adamzeski in the robotics lab looking at the maps and representing sort of thinking or intelligence or cooperation on the maps. And I was wondering if any of those representations to you felt more or less authentic, or were they all equally valid ways of engaging society and thinking about this species that supposedly there are over 1,000 different types, but at the end of the film, one person is saying, well, we could get rid of it, and probably nothing would happen to the environment. And then somebody else actually uses the word, these are vital, right? So really different perspectives on the role of the slime mold, but then also really different representations of their activities. So I was just curious if anyone spoke to you more than another as being more effective or more interesting.
I mean, I found each of them interesting in their own way, but I guess this opens up again into a conversation, I guess, of sort of what we would want the relationship between different types of practice, between art and science. I found that, some of the practices came, or people performed different types of truth claims. There was a real difference between the biologists I'm sorry, I don't remember what you call someone who studies slime molds. Okay. Tended to have greater authority, like this is what the organism does, this is its reality, where the other people were like, here's what engaging with this might induce us to build or imagine. So, for the computer scientists and for the artists, there seemed to be not so much we're learning about slime molds, is that slime molds are reformulating how we think about machines or intelligence, or what it is to be human, maybe, if we have to join little networks of being slime mold. So each of those practices, and for me, I believe there should be different practices. I don't think everything should just be about telling you what the world is like, or come out with a necessarily functioning product. That each of those practices produce like a different type of understanding of the world, and maybe a richer world, but they're definitely each had a different mode of address, I guess.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think having people approach it from different angles, I mean, it's, I don't know what is the most important question to ask. For me, it would be something to do with behavioral conditioning for the organism. For somebody else, it would be, can it calculate the shortest route between one position to another position? So, it's just like any other type of, I don't want to call the organism a tool because it's its own independent entity, but, as higher order beings, as humans, we use things in nature in different ways, right? So somebody uses a block of wood they used to build a house, somebody else builds a musical instrument with it, right? So it's you sculpt the material and you get it to do something depending on what you're after, right? So it would be a bit presumptuous for me to say that's not the proper application of the slime mold. So it's clear to me that using it for computation is valid if you get some sort of repeatable behavior out of it that will contribute to I guess human knowledge and progress in some way, right? In this whole grand edifice of human learning that we.
Okay, I'm going to pose one last question to the panelists, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience. Given that the theme of the festival is time, one of the things that I thought was really interesting was the sort of history of science that was brought into this narrative. Specifically, Percy Smith's sort of magic mixies films of the Physarum and the slime molds. And one of the things that occurred to me is here you have a slime mold that moves so slowly in time, and yet we have this human fascination to magnify that time or speed it up. So in essence, to make it beautiful or less gross or less creepy, we're sort of trying to make the undulations of the slime mold beautiful or organic, or somehow in our own language, in our own visual perception, able to digest their movement, their time span. And so I was curious if the two of you wanted to say anything about that sort of repeated desire to speed up the movement of the slime mold so that we as humans can see it.
Yeah, I mean, time is of course of the essence in thinking cinema, because it could, the cinema, time-based mediums, whether sound recording or cinema, can bring things back to life. They can retrieve, they transform basically our relationship to time in the world. And certainly one realized that when you see it so fast, I like that idea of time magnification, because it kind of, it's almost like intensifying the impact of time on our perception, rather than sort of being conscious of the fact that it got cut out, that so much time got lost. But there is, of course, that interest in why we want to magnify and why we wanted to render this organism as moving and living and seemingly breathing, that its slowness is a problem. And I could say a lot about speed in contemporary societies, and why we think fast is virtuous and slow is stupid. Did we have to make it fast to imagine that it could be intelligent? Is there a normative component? That I'll leave it to the audience to decide. However, I found it, of course, also beautiful and animated, right? And I found it aesthetically quite rich to see, and also sometimes horrible. Like, I thought it was almost more disgusting and scary that it was moving so fast. Like, it looked like it could eat things.
It can.
And it can, yes, no, but I mean, like me.
Yeah, I also liked Percy Smith's choice of time magnification. And you know, for me as a scientist, I think it's that's where you make a lot of progress, inroads and things, is when you bring things to the human scale, right? So when you magnify things optically, right? So it's the origins of microscopy, or bring things closer, you know, the astronomy, telescopes, and this is now, you know, it seems less tangible, but you're doing the same thing with time here, right? You're speeding it up and bringing it to a human scale, or you're slowing something down, which, you know, was interest here, but if things are happening in femtoseconds, you can't imagine that. So you've got to slow it down to see it. And so bringing this into the scale and perspective, you're able to then now see these patterns, these undulations that you see here. That you normally wouldn't see, but you know, for this organism. So then you're able now to study it. So I just see this, you know, this sort of time-lapse photography technique as another tool to bring things, you know, into our own human spectrum, so we can, you know, do something with it, whatever that is, either write an equation or apply it to something, make some music.
Great, thank you so much, both of you. I want to turn to the audience and ask if there are any questions. We have a microphone over here and over here. You can just shout it out if you feel bashful, and I can convert the question to the audience. Yes.
I'll just talk from here if that's okay.
Okay. Can everyone hear now? I'll also repeat your question once you.
So I really like the movie. I knew slime molds were cool, but I didn't know how cool they were. And so that was amazing. Every different segment was a new surprise. Wow, we're going to do something different. But what I think is sort of missing, one of the things that the panelists have brought out as well, is that I think we live in a society where people don't know how to shift time scale, they don't know how to shift size scale. And everything about science and technology and evolution and our history is about being able to see reality in multiple scales, from the very big to the very small, from 13.8 billion years ago to today. So I think it's just that's a huge challenge that scientists have sort of intrinsically got about the difference between a nanometer and a micron, right? Or a centimeter, or a light year. But we're just this amazing cascade of activity that's going on each of our 50 trillion cells, right? All the time, right? So I just think anything that gives humans better understanding of these multiple scales, of this new sort of great matrix of reality, which we really didn't exist. And very few of us have an actual appreciation. But let alone this weird creature.
Right, last night, actually, at the opening night, we had one of the panelists was talking about things that live a really, 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 really long time. And that we can't, as humans, get our minds around that. And in some ways, I think of these slime molds as part of that category. They move slowly, they exist in ways that we don't understand. So I think this point you're making about humans being able to appreciate things at different time scales, at different magnification scales is really interesting. And I think the first images of the moon and the Earth from the moon were along those lines, right? We sort of saw ourselves in a really different level of scale.
Yeah, I think it's a critical political and ethical question as well. I think that the ability to be able to think at different scales, from the nanospeeds of our financial systems to the ecological eons that now environmental problems are involved. I mean, so there's so many levels of scale from having to deal with a nuclear disaster that can take 30,000 years to clear out to hyper fast, of course, phenomena that I think are becoming essential that we encounter and be able to deal with.
Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, I'm worried about these, for example, the maze experiments that they did. When we're talking about mechanical versus calculating or living. It looked very much, or it seemed as if there's a kind of trial and error process with the chemotaxis that the thing is following. But the suggestion that there's more than that going on. Do you know where it goes beyond trial and error?
So I'm just going to repeat your question so everyone can hear it. If I misspeak, please let me know. So I think the question was specifically looking at some of the art projects and also some of the scientific experiments looking at mazes and the slime mold's ability to find the shortest route between two distances or a particular maze. And the question was, is that really more than mechanistic trial and error chemotaxis, which is the ability of a cell to follow a chemical gradient, or is there something more supposedly behind that? Is that the question?
Yeah, and how do you know?
And how do you know? How can you differentiate between those two things? So Oliver, I don't know if you want to take that question?
Well, that's a tough one. I'm not sure. That's my honest answer.
The only thing I can tell you is that from the perspective of computing, it doesn't matter because it's behavioral. And as long as you can find a solution that gets your machine to figure out the fastest way through the maze, whether it's some cellular process that makes the decision or not, is not relevant, which just sounds weird. But so I don't know much about this particular maze, but I know in general, the way you approach a problem computationally is not in terms of whether it matters in that sense.
Yeah, at some level, at some higher level, there's an abstraction for all this, right? So mathematically, that at some level it's irrelevant what is doing the computing or what's the machinery that does it, whether it's soft and squishy or whether it's a bunch of circuits, if it's using the same equation to I guess solve the problem.
Yeah. If I understood the question correctly, though, it might have been also about how things are being represented. So I know that when I saw the film the first time and I saw the Adam Zesky's the maps, so showing that the slime molds had basically represented typical road maps in the United States and worldwide. My original feeling when I saw it in the film was that I was being told a story that the slime molds would somehow, if they could build highways, would build highways exactly like our highways. And at first that kind of bothered me because I thought it's not really true. They're putting oats in major cities. And so the slime mold is just going to crawl towards a carbohydrate resource. So the humans are basically creating the program by which the mechanism would happen. But then I thought about it a little bit later because I didn't want to be so critical. And I thought, well, let me think about it differently. And I thought, well, if you think about societies, urban centers often have resources that rural areas don't have. And so you could say that this is sort of a metaphor for how social constructions happen. And that the slime mold is basically emulating the same thing through human intervention. But at first I was a little taken also. I thought, like, what is the message here? That these slime molds are so intelligent that they could build the highway system the same way? Or is it really just a mechanistic environmental signal response?
Well, if there's signals being sent within the body of the thing, that would make a difference. Whether the front end can tell the back end what's going on.
Well, I mean, I do think that the front end is telling the back end what's going on, and the way in which that's happening is that the chemical that it's following towards the oat is going to, as Oliver said, the front end of a cell is basically going to change its dynamics, its receptors, and so forth in such a way, and then it might secrete a signal to its cohort behind, and then that basically makes a series of signals. I actually have another art project which is similar to this on the PowerPoint. If I can show it, or I can just describe it. And it's a work where one bacterial mutant is basically being signaled by another bacteria, and by doing so, it changes its color. And so as you watch this sort of happen, you basically see a wave of color occurring across a piece of fabric that's been soaked in these various bacteria. So it literally is one bacterium communicating down the road behind its cohorts in sort of a dominoes effect. And so I don't know if for you, you could call that intelligence. I might call it something else. Somebody else might call it behavior. Are there any other questions? Comments? Would any of you want to do a slime mold workshop?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, so I'm going to leave a piece of paper up here, and I'm going to ask for your name and your email address, and we could maybe host a slime mold workshop in the next month or two, and I'll send out an email and an announcement, and maybe we can also share that with GenSpace. I think GenSpace also does some workshops along those lines, or not so much?
Oh, we have lots of workshops, yeah.
So we can send that information out to you so that if you want to play with the slime mold or interact, collaborate, as one of the artists said, with the slime mold, you would have an opportunity to do so. Thank you so much for staying.
Thank you.
Thank you to my panel.
Thank you so much for that wonderful panel. So I just want to remind everyone that we have quite a few events coming up again at the new school tomorrow. Tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. we're actually doing a bacteria painting workshop. So it's not slime mold, but it's still bioart. And that's free of cost. You just have to RSVP online. So if anyone is interested, please RSVP tonight. And
or you can just show up and watch.
Yeah, or you can show up and we can share you with someone. And that will be happening tomorrow in this building. And then throughout the day, we actually recently partnered with the Marina Abramovich Institute. So if any of you know of the artist who's present and the piece that she did at the MoMA, her institute is one of our partners now, and we're partnering with one of her performance artists for a long duration performance piece tomorrow at the Made in New York Media Center. And so you can stop by for that. And we'll also be screening films from the 48-hour film competition tomorrow at that same venue. And then again, tomorrow at the new school at 1:30, we're going to be having a shorts program called Modern Animals. And so that should be pretty interesting. So check out our programs online, and we'll be having events all week. And one last thing, I just want to remind you that we do have the People's Choice Award ballots just right outside. So you might have them in your programs as well, but just don't forget to vote. And we'll be collecting names for the raffle that I mentioned for the award ceremony right outside as well. So thank you all for coming, and enjoy your evening.